In this lesson, we are going to look at subtracting rational numbers. So first of all, let's go back and let's review subtraction of integers. If we have 12 subtract 3, most of us would be able to know that the answer there is 9. What you have is you're on a number line, you're at 12, and we're going to subtract 3. So we're going to go back 3. 1, 2, 3. And so you would end up at 9. Negative 12 subtract 3 sometimes confuses people. So let's go again. We're on a number line now, and we're at negative 12. Now, just as in the first example, subtraction means move backwards. We're going to do the same thing. Backwards on the number line or left on a number line is getting smaller. So we have negative 12 subtract 3 would give us negative 15. 12 subtract a negative 3. Now, depending upon what your previous math teachers would have done, there are a couple of ways that this can be explained. Some teachers may have talked about adding the opposite. When you are subtracting integers, you add the opposite. So what would happen here is we would end up adding, and the opposite of negative 3 is positive 3. So now we just have 12 plus 3, which would be 15. So that's one way a teacher may have shown you. Another one may have used the idea of double signs back to back with no number between them. So what we have here is we have two signs back to back that are not separated by a numerical value. In this case, we can use our multiplication of signs rule. And when you have two negatives, you actually end up adding. So we have 12 plus 3, which gives us 15. So either if you want to look at it as add the opposite, that is one strategy that will work. Or we can look at it using our multiplication of signs rules. And there is no numerical value between those signs, so we know that a negative and a negative would change to a positive. The same ideas apply when we are subtracting rational numbers. If we look at the first example here, 5/6 subtract 4/3. When we are adding or subtracting fractions, we need to find a common denominator. So that's going to be the first thing we do. And our lowest common denominator will be 6. So we're going to multiply the second fraction by 2 over 2. And we will end up with 5/6 subtract 8/6. And just as with adding rational numbers or adding fractions, the denominator will stay 6. And we are going to do 5 subtract 8. So 5 subtract 8. On a number line, if we start at 5, and we're going to go back 8 spots. So we're going to have 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3. That was 8 going backwards. So 5 subtract 8 is negative 3. So we have negative 3/6. If you recognize the fact that this can be simplified, we can take a 3 out of both of these. We end up with negative 1/2. So when you are subtracting fractions, find a common denominator and then simplify the numerators, which is just integer subtraction or addition, depending on what sign you end up with. So let's look at the second example. Negative 3/10 subtract negative 9/5. Again, we need to find a common denominator. And the lowest common denominator is going to be 10. So we're going to multiply the second fraction by 2 over 2. And we'll have negative 3/10 subtract negative 18/10. So just as before, our denominator stays the same. So now we are dealing with integer subtraction. We have negative 3 subtract negative 18. So just like on the previous slide, where we had our last example there and we were subtracting a negative 3, you can either consider this as adding the opposite, or two negatives not separated by a numerical value become a positive. Now it's important to note, this negative out in front is separate from these other two. It's a negative 3. It is separated from the second negative sign by the numerical value of 3. It's the two green negative signs, the subtract, the negative 18, that are not separated by a numerical value that we can look at switching. The negative 3 still remains. Now subtract a negative 18, we're going to end up adding 18. Either adding the opposite, which would be plus a positive 18, or we can just write it as plus 18, all over 10. So now if you had a number line in front of you, you would be starting at negative 3, and you're going to go 18 to the right. And you would end up at 15, so we have 15 over 10. You can leave it like that. Maybe you recognize that they can both be divided by 5, so we end up with 3 halves. Or you can change it to a mixed fraction, 1 and 1/2. So subtracting rational numbers is the same process as adding rational numbers. You still need to find a common denominator. But then when you are combining your numerators, you are doing integer subtraction or addition.